state? I thought Arkansas was ahead of the primary there, but Clinton is pushing for Pennsylvania instead. So having a little bit of a tussle over location, where and when, and all that. Dave Jacobson, Democratic strategist and campaign consultant at Shalom Communications. He worked as a lead field staffer in several states for Hillary's 2008 presidential bid. And he joins on the line from Los Angeles. Dave, good evening to you. Thanks for joining us on the line here. Senator Sanders seems to feel like he's got some mojo going with them. He swept a number of states. They weren't big states, but they were. It was a sweep nonetheless. It's a bit of a minor slap to Hillary, isn't it?
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's fresh evidence of his sort of insurgent underdog campaign, and his message of really, taking on the Washington establishment is clearly still resonating with voters. He desperately needed these wins, as well as the wins they had in Idaho and Utah earlier this week. He sort of needed to perform as well as Hillary did in the South, but in the West. The question is it too little too late, or is he able to sort of capitalize on this momentum and eat more into her delegate lead?
Right. Dave, why do you think that this enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders persists the way it is? A lot of people have said that the same anger that persists on the Democratic side and that gave rise to the possibility of a Sanders campaign is the polar opposite of the same kind of anger which continues to drive the Trump campaign.
Right. I mean, look, Bernie Sanders has genuinely tapped a nerve in this country. And so, at a certain level, so has Donald Trump, right? I mean, people are salivating for authenticity. They want people who tell it like it is. They want people to really shake up the status quo. And I think it sort of underscores the fact that people are overwhelmingly frustrated all across America, from the South to the North to the East to the West. People want change. They want fundamental overhaul. And that is what essentially gave birth to the Bernie Sanders and the Donald Trump, and at a certain level, Ted Cruz movements. And I think that sort of highlights the fact that, you're really seeing an identity crisis within the Democratic Party. You got Bernie Sanders on the far left, who's been able to sort of energize a groundswell of support among young people who, are growing up and all they see is gridlock in Washington, among working class folks who feel like the trade policies of both Democrats and Republicans haven't helped them over the years. They're seeing stagnant wages. And I think you're seeing some of that on the other side as well. But, the reality is Bernie Sanders really needs to do well in every state moving forward and sort of continue to harness this message of income inequality, taking on the establishment, the billionaire class, right? And he's got to get to 2/3 of the vote in every state moving forward to catch up to her. So it's going to be a steep climb, but it's not impossible.
Dave, I have to say, I'm shocked at the level at the injection of stupidity that's gone into the minds of voters this year. I mean, it doesn't take a PhD in economics to recognize that Bernie Sanders' economic prescription doesn't work. He wants to tax Wall Street. He wants to tax speculation. He wants to impose taxes on the rich. He thinks the rich are evil. He wants to hit them with higher taxes. How would he fund free college tuition? How would he fund all his initiatives? He would tax Wall Street. Who does he want to attack? Wall Street. He wants to tax people an industry that he wants to bring down. Economists have said again and again, his math doesn't make any sense. The same economists say that Trump's economic math doesn't make any sense.
Right, and that's why you're seeing the vast majority of newspaper editorial boards endorsing Hillary Clinton overwhelmingly over Bernie Sanders because, these are very intelligent, thoughtful folks who read through all the policies and they really understand, which one is actually plausible, particularly in the current dynamic that you have with the White House and Congress and back in Washington. I think the reality is, though, if you look at the people who are supporting Bernie Sanders versus Hillary, right, people who are 50 years old and over are overwhelmingly joining the Clinton bandwagon because they know that the reality is Bernie Sanders is going to have an enormously difficult time moving forward his agenda. He calls for this sort of political revolution, right, in order to change all of the political dynamics in Washington. That means electing a new Congress, electing him to the White House, right? But the reality is we're not seeing that groundswell of support of all these new voters in numbers like what we saw in 2008 turn around in 2016. So the challenge for him is really making a compelling case that he is creating this political revolution. He's winning in some Western states, but he's still far behind Clinton. And unless he does something to reinvigorate his campaign and boost his numbers up to where we saw in 2008, doing that political revolution or accomplishing it would be very difficult.
Dave, I'm going to ask you, I'm not making a judgment, I'm just making a statement to throw it out there for you to comment on. But here, with Sanders, you have a self-avowed socialist. I mean, if you talk about wanting to drive some people to Canada, here's one guy who would do it. People don't trust Hillary. Donald Trump is, what can you say, Donald Trump. Ted Cruz has his own issues. The only person with a real track record of actually governing in this entire race is the guy who's way behind everybody else, and that is John Kasich. How do you rate his chances given 2 or 3 months' time?
Look, I mean, and that's why if you look at the head-to-head matchup between, Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, if you put them up against John Kasich, Kasich is far and away ahead of all the other candidates in terms of Donald Trump or Ted Cruz against the Democrats. So he is probably the best candidate, I'd say, that the GOP has to sort of put up against either Democratic candidate moving forward. The problem with Trump and Cruz is they're just so polarizing, and they've turned off so many folks. Their unfavorables are so high that it puts them in a very weak position for a general election. Kasich, on the other hand, I think his pathway is he's got to continue to eat into the delegate lead and prevent Donald Trump from getting to sort of the golden number of 1,237 delegates. And if he's able to, hold Donald Trump back, let's say to 1,100 delegates, there's an argument to be made that at a contested convention, perhaps on round 2 or round 3 of voting, Kasich could be able to sort of coalesce the establishment, perhaps some Tea Party, some conservative voters, and put together a coalition to become the nominee. It's unlikely, but it's definitely something that a lot of people in Washington are thinking about, particularly establishment Republicans.
Dave, offer your services. I'll try to find you his email and number, okay? He just needs a little bit of cool factor injected into it. Call it Brand J. Maybe bring Rihanna or some of Beyonce or into it. Dave, always great talking to you. Dave Jacobson talking to us from L.A., Los Angeles. Just when it seemed GOP politics couldn't get any lower, a strange spat was